I'm sticking to the union. I'm sticking to the union. Oh no, you can't scare me. I'm sticking to the union. I'm sticking to the union till the day I die.
You see, Larry Duncan was not just a bystander as a filmmaker.
The history of his work is really a history of the working class the last 20, 30 years.
Every time that we wanted to do something, Larry called. He was there with his camera crew.
But I really loved what he was doing with each shot, each edit, each script that he would write.
We could do a lot worse than follow Larry's example.
Larry knew that workers and their organizations needed to control their own narrative.
Hi, my name's Larry Duncan, and I'm a co-producer of a cable TV series called Labor Beat.
But for a lot of us here, you know, our relationship to Larry is as a fighter in the struggle for workers' rights, a fighter in the struggle for, as far as I'm concerned, humanity. When we talk about the struggle for working people, we're talking about the struggle for humanity, right? And the future of this planet. And Larry devoted basically his entire adult life to that struggle in one capacity or another. Particularly in regards to his advocacy for labor media. Larry was very passionate about making sure that the stories of working people, their struggles were told, and he devoted countless hours of his life to that. Not being paid, in no way remunerated, always as a volunteer, but literally dedicated, you know, almost every waking hour that he wasn't working or doing something else. And in his last years, since he's retired, I mean, that's basically was his full-time job, was making sure that these stories got told. So it's a big loss for all of us. It's a big blow. It was personally a blow for me. I as a lot of you know, moved to Southern California last August. And so in the last year that I've been no longer here in Chicago, one of the things I really miss about this city is the tremendous network of, you know, activists in this city, working in the labor movement, the immigrants' rights movement, and it's been a bit difficult to be a part and away from that for the last year. And Larry was really kind of one of my primary conduits back to this world here. In fact, I realized shortly after he passed that the only person that I talked to more often back here in Chicago during that time was my wife. It was the only person that I communicated with more than than Larry. You know, I got to know Larry originally in the State of the Worker struggle. We're going to be hearing about that today as well. C.J. Hawking agreed to come and speak on behalf of kind of Larry's role in that, which is a really important, formative period for a lot of our lives. A lot of us here, you know, is a big, important period for us. And that's when I first met Larry, but I didn't really get to know Larry until I started producing Labor Express Radio back in 2000, I forget the dates now, 2004. And that's when I really got to know Larry. And, you know, I stepped into that position because Wayne Heimbach, who's also here today, and hopefully Wayne will share with us at some point as well. Wayne had to step away from it for various reasons, couldn't sustain the commitment that he had for like 10 years to doing that program. And so I kind of stepped into it not knowing what I was doing. And there's no way in the world that I'd be still doing that 15 years later if it wasn't for Larry's constant encouragement to me to do it. Often when I felt like there was nobody listening to that program and it was of no value, there was Larry there whispering in my ear about the importance of what we were doing. And so there, you know, I owe a great debt to him that I've been, you know, doing this work for as long as I have as well. I wanted to share a few thoughts. This when I was kind of processing what had happened. Andrew and I particularly were talking those first few weeks. I was trying to help Andrew come up with some ideas of what to put out there as a public notice about Larry's passing on the Facebook page and our website and so on. And thank God Andrew's a lot more eloquent than I am. So Andrew kind of came up with most of the statement, but all I could do was kind of just throw out some ideas to him in an email at the time. But I did want to share just a little piece of some of the stuff that I said to Andrew at the time. I first met Larry back in 1993 when we were both active in the State of the Workers Solidarity Committee, but I only really got to know Larry well after deciding to take over Labor Express Radio from Wayne Heimbach in 2004. Chances are I would not still be producing Labor Express 14 years later if it wasn't for Larry's constant encouragement and support. I often felt like Larry might be the only one listening, but somehow that seemed enough to keep me going. I knew I could count on him to give me feedback after every show about the content and whether or not it was broadcast correctly on air, not online. Larry was a more faithful listener to the program than I was myself. I so wish I had the chance to let him know how much I appreciated his encouragement and support all these years. I realize now that I communicate with Larry since my departure more than almost anybody else than my wife. I just can't get over the fact that I won't get the chance to communicate with him again. I went on later in the same email to say, I know it sounds melodramatic to say, but I just feel the world and my life feels more lonely and a more diminished place with Larry's passing. I fear for the world too, with far too voices like his in it. I can't help reflect on my own legacy and accomplishments or lack thereof, but I certainly, as I'm certainly not getting younger, but I know that that's certainly something that can't be said of Larry. He's got a backlog of some hundreds and hundreds of hours of labor video that's a testament and a lasting legacy to his work. You know, what I keep thinking about too is how we kind of, both Andrew and I, how we found out about what had happened. You know, I was so used to hearing from Larry on a weekly basis, usually after the program or a couple of days after the program to give me some feedback and so on, that it was a little odd that I hadn't heard from him in a while. And I had emailed him actually for some thoughts on something I was working on. And it was so unusual not to hear from him right away. And I remember that my first thought at the time was, you know, how many times has Larry reached out to me about something and it's taken me weeks to get back to him? So I'm not going to be upset that I don't hear from him right away, right? And about a week went by and Andrew, you know, calls me and says, hey, have you heard from Larry? I haven't heard from Larry, you know, in a while. And it was such a shock to all of us. He was so present in our lives all the time. And that's kind of how, actually, honestly, that we all found out, you know, what had occurred. So it's, you know, for me, it's been one of those moments where you're really reminded of what, you know, how much a role somebody plays in your life, unfortunately, far too often when they're not there anymore. And so I hope this is a reminder, you know, to us all about making sure that the people that are important to us know that they're important to us. Big part of today, though, too, is also about maintaining that legacy, right? I mean, Larry devoted his life to this because he believed in it. I hope that we all believe in it enough that we can continue that legacy on into the future. We also are going to have a musical accompaniment throughout the evening by Bucky Halker, agreed to be here. Everybody knows Bucky, of course, right? He is the labor troubadour of Chicago. So, Bucky, you want to kick us off with a little song, and then we'll have Zara come up?
And I'm sure some of you already know it. Mike, you know this, The Preacher and the Slave, so all right. Long-haired preachers come out every night, try to tell you what's wrong and what's right. But if you ask them for something to eat, they will answer in voices so sweet. You will eat by and by, in that glorious land above the sky, way up high. Work and pray, live on hay. You'll get pie in the sky when you die, that's a lie. Will the Starvation Army band plays? They sing and they clap and they pray. When they get all your coins on their drum, well, they'll tell you that you're on the bum. You will eat by and by, in that glorious land above the sky, way up high. Work and pray, live on hay. You'll get pie in the sky when you die, that's a lie. Now, when I'm standing up here because I'm looking down in an aerial view, I can see some people are not singing. I think this is not in the spirit of Larry or the occasion. Am I correct about this? Right. So some of you people in the back row, to my left, I see you back there. Okay. I'm gonna see your mouth. You can just mouth the words if you want. That'll be okay, all right? Holy rollers and jumpers come out. They holler, they jump, and they shout. Give your money to Jesus, they say. He will cure all diseases today. You will eat by and by. In that glorious land above the sky, way up high. Work and pray, live on hay. You get pie in the sky when you die, that's a lie. Working folks from all countries unite. Side by side in the struggle we'll fight. When the world and its wealth we have gained, to those grafters we'll sing this refrain. You will eat by and by. When you learn how to cook and to fry, cook and fry, chop some wood, that'll do you good. You get pie in the sky when you die, that's a lie. You will eat by and by. In that glorious land above the sky, way up high. Work and pray, live on hay. You get pie in the sky when you die, that's a lie. Keep singing.
Hi, my name is Zara Griswold, and I am Larry's daughter. This is very surreal to me, as you can imagine. I'm still letting all of this sink in, but all I can think about right now is what he's thinking about all of this, and I'm sure he has a huge smile on his face. When we were little, he would drive my brother and I to visit his parents, my grandparents in southern Illinois, and I think I remember that more than anything, because it's a long drive, about 6 hours. And, he'd be typical 70s gear, in the front seat, arm out the window, window rolled down, smoking cigarettes. We'd be in the back seat and, are we there yet? How much longer is it? But those rides, and I just remember him, on those rides, he'd always try to talk to us about, important stuff going on in the world. Of course, it went in one ear and out the other. When my children were born, he was the very first visitor at our home to see them. And sure enough, he showed up with his video camera. They were, little tiny weebies. I carried them up the stairs, and he was right behind me with his camera, and he interviewed my husband and I sitting on the couch holding our babies so we could share our thoughts about being first-time parents. But he continued to video them through their, he stopped once they got older and they, but he did for every time we would get together, he would bring it along and, do some videoing, and then I'd get in the mail about 2 weeks later, a CD with a little movie that he put together and edited. So it was really special, and I'm so happy that I still saved all of those. Thank you all so much for being here today to celebrate my dad's life. It has ended too soon, but his work and his legacy, thanks to all of you, will continue. Thank you.
When we were all a couple of years into the disastrous Iraq War, and I was documenting the beginnings of this rising struggle for education justice in Chicago, that I decided to check out this media organization, Committee for Labor Access, because my project had absolutely no direction to it whatsoever, and I thought maybe you guys have some footage that we could share, and maybe we could talk about how you guys could help me make this doc feature. Well, instead, I quickly realized I'd found my tribe, and that tribe's wise chief sort of immediately impressed me, and so because Larry's strong commitment to using modern media for the advancement of working class issues was really only surpassed by his amazing knowledge of labor history, which I was just beginning to learn about. So from the beginnings of the fight to actually gain grassroots access to the power of cable television, Larry knew that workers and their organizations needed to control their own narrative. Don't take my word for it. Let's hear from the man himself. What we're going to play first is it's not from the Labor Beat archives. It's a rare clip from 1992 that we literally just got our hands on in the past 2 weeks. And I say it's a rare clip because Larry was not prone to get in front of the camera and be on tape, right? He liked to instead just use really good editing to let the individual rank and file people tell the story. And not have sort of a voice of God kind of coming down there. So it was, now I'm in this sort of opposite mode of trying to find like every single one that he narrated just so I can hear his voice again. And so when we got this clip a little bit back, we realized we were sitting on some gold.
Hi, my name's Larry Duncan, and I'm a co-producer of a cable TV series called Labor Beat. And I'll talk a little bit more about Labor Beat in a few minutes, but I'd like to first begin by talking about alternative television and media activism, because Labor Beat, which is a program dealing with what's happening with unions, what's happening with working people, and from a point of view that we would normally see on broadcast television, that's part of a whole movement to do something about the way we are all being manipulated by major broadcast corporate television. And that in the labor movement, that awareness that working people and their organizations have to do something about this has been growing over the years, and has also been developing over the last year through the course of the Persian Gulf War, the war against Iraq. During that, as the military briefings began to come down, we all watched this on CNN or other stations. There began to develop a hue and cry even within the major media, ABC, CBS, C-SPAN, and so on, that the military were controlling the news feed and dictating to the media what they're going to talk about. During the news coverage, the media would go out and they would cover the anti-war demonstrations and attempt to appear as though they're being impartial. Then they would also cover the pro-war demonstrations. But what they didn't do was that in the studios they invited the anti-war the pro-war, the pro-administration speakers to come and sit down in an easy chair, have a chat, in a sense being invited into the living room of the American public. But the points of view of the anti-war demonstrators were simply limited to very short sound bites of a chant or a holding a picket line out in the street. And this is an important distinction, that the anti-war movement was not allowed to come into the studio and sit around the easy chairs with all the commentators and to develop all of the subtleties, nuances of that other point of view. Well, there was also within labor a developing anti-war point of view, which and also a debate going on at the AFL-CIO, and it more or less was kind of a standoff because the certain conservative sections of the AFL-CIO wanted to be completely uncritical of the administration's policies, and there were other large sections that wanted to criticize. I wanted to encourage those of you out there in the community who are union members or think of yourselves as working people. I encourage you to come down here to the Access Center and get involved and start learning how to use the equipment, start producing shows that inform the community about the kinds of struggles that you're in to improve your situation as a working person. So this is Larry Duncan from Labor Beat saying 10-4, and get out there and start using those cameras.
I first met Larry Duncan in Decatur, Illinois. where 25 years and 6 weeks ago, 763 workers were locked out of their plant. And Larry arrived in Decatur with his camera and with his heart. As the lockout went on for 2.5 years, Larry's interview with workers, coverage of demonstrations, coverage of the police actions against the workers, and rallies with thousands of people all illuminated the struggle for all of us. Larry magically brought a passion for the working class. You see, Larry Duncan was not just a bystander as a filmmaker. He had heart in how he filmed. Larry filmed in such a way that we not only learned about the people in this daily film or other films, we learned about ourselves.
And Larry was a hardcore activist in media, and that's what really made him an important force, I think, in Chicago. I first heard about Larry from Jim Hamilton in St. Louis, who was working with Larry, I think when he got his camera there in 1976. That's when I first heard about it, because Larry covered a demonstration against the Nazis in St. Louis in 1976. And it's interesting because today, right now in Washington, D.C., there's a struggle against the Nazis as well, and the right-wingers who want to march. And they asked the ATU 689 to have a special rail car to bring the Nazis to a rally in front of the White House. And I salute the members and the leadership of ATU 698 saying, to hell with you. We're not going to give a train. We're not going to give a special train to the Nazis to the White House. They need a train to hell is where they need, really. So I think that's a good development. But Larry's view was, as my view, as well as many others, is that we have to hear the voices of working people in this country and around the world to understand what's really going on. Not by somebody telling them what's going on, but the voices of working people, what they're going through every day. The history of his work is really a history of the working class the last 20, 30 years.
Ironically, I cannot be here in person because some of the work that Larry and I did brought me all the way over to Brazil, and I met some revolutionists and worker leaders that are on the video that he was able to produce. I knew Larry as a revolutionist dedicated to helping build confidence and consciousness in the international working class. I was one of several worker militants who worked closely with Larry, especially after I was illegally fired as a bus driver from the Chicago Transit Authority in 2016 for my union and political work. He gave me and our defense campaign much good advice, and he spent hours editing and producing with Labor Beat Video public videos of our successful international campaign to get my job back. After I was fired, we received solidarity from around the world, partly because of the videos that we did with Labor Beat and Larry Duncan. He coached and guided me over the phone on how to do the work of a revolutionary journalist for 2 weeks while I was in Brazil. I sent back many gigabytes of video, and he worked many hours to produce a great video about that trip. Larry came to many dozens of transit worker meetings, and those are just the ones that I knew about that he went to, and also many actions to support us and selflessly and tirelessly offer his skills to our struggle. He told a meeting of rank-and-file CTA workers in late 2017 that he felt ours was one of the most important untold stories in Chicago, and that story was ready to burst into public consciousness. He not only closely watched and reported on working class struggles, he was also part of them. He wasn't a neutral observer. He was clearly on our side. He had a rare ability to politically understand what was important in struggles as they happened and presented it professionally and publicly, all while being on the front line of the working class struggles. I hope others will learn from and follow his example.
Christine, former officer, and myself, former staffer here at the Chicago Teachers Union, just wanted to recognize You know, the considerable commitment, dedication, and contributions that Larry made to make our struggle possible and visible. You know, for one, the caucus rank and file educators that started 10 years ago really started as a video project, you know, on the front lines, Renaissance 2010, that Labor Beat and Larry in particular helped us with to get off the ground. And so that's a little known history that, you know, Karen Lewis's caucus that wins power here in 2010, you know, is in no small part a result of some of that independent media that Larry helped publicize our struggles when we were a caucus and then when we became in leadership of the union.
And I just want to recognize Larry's constant focus on the rank and file. We'd go to a rally and Karen and Jesse are superstars. But Larry would jump out there with that camera and stick that giant microphone right in your face. And if you were rank and file, he didn't know who you were, but he would ask the most insightful questions and pull out the details of your struggle that were most important to everybody. And it's just a huge loss, and we're going to miss him dearly. Thank you.
They have taken untold billions, they never toiled to earn. But without our brains and muscle, not a single wheel would turn. We can break their haughty power, gain our freedom when we learn that the union makes us strong. Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. For the union makes us strong. In our hands is placed the power greater than their hoarded gold, greater than the strength of armies magnified 1,000-fold. We can bring to birth a new world on the ashes of the old when the union makes us strong. Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. For the union makes us strong. One more chorus now.